Hello, this is Mr. Frere again, and I'm going to talk you through these slides. As you would have seen in my announcement, I've decided to continue with addiction. I think this is probably most sensible because it will be more interesting and exciting for you. Though, of course, like all the courses, it does start quite simply and it should escalate from there. What we have to remind ourselves is this is part of the options section of the specification. So we see from here that it is, 4.3.10. There are several different choices and we have chosen addiction for you. What I'm going to focus on today is literally this very small section, and I'm going to do it in two parts, and the first part is mostly going to introduce this idea of some kind of physical and psychological dependence. It's under the subtopic of describing addiction. Now, the reason for this is that we have to start using some of the terminology that they want us to use. In my introduction, I kind of got you to go through this idea that addiction is more than just a substance, that we have several kind of layers of it, and in terms of the definition, we would have heard of words like dependence and tolerance and withdrawal. Now, this will go into much deeper detail. Now, in order to introduce this, I'm going to show you a number of pictures. This is one of them. We see these are before and after pictures. We see a young lady here, and just a year later, it looks like she's not doing as well as she could be. This one's a lot more dramatic, but there is also 11 years difference. Now, the question really is, what has happened? Okay, and this is not meant to be a trick question, but of course, it's for you to see that these people's lives, before drugs and after drugs, has taken a physical toll on their bodies. I've got a few other pictures here for you. Okay? Before and after. Now, of course, this could be a straightforward explanation, that while one is addicted to drugs, we are focusing on other things, so we're not too worried about cutting our hair or our appearance or things like that. But we do see quite clearly that drugs and addiction take its toll on a person's body. There's another one before and after. I'm not too sure how long a time frame it is, but these are all the same people. So the short of it, let's look at some of this. There are physical and psychological dependence that could explain how those people who were originally kind of looking okay, after some time they're looking a lot more rough. They look as if they physically are struggling. Now, what we have is a couple of kind of ideas. It says people who are physically dependent on a substance need to take the substance in order to feel normal. So this is quite a key idea here. It says here, if you're physically dependent, so if I'm dependent on something, I need it. Okay, now I'm sure your parents probably use phrases like, oh, you don't want something, you don't need something, you want something, okay? And that's why it's a deliberate use of the word need. Okay, so an addict needs the substance to feel normal. Okay, and this is part of the idea of physical dependence. Now, having a physical dependence is not necessarily a sign of addiction. Now, this might be something that surprises you. We're all physically dependent on substances. Okay, so for example, you drink water. Okay, you're physically dependent on that water. And now, I don't know if any of you have tried this, but you've maybe tried to increase the amount of water you drink. Okay, and what you'll find that if over a couple of months, maybe even a couple of years, you do start drinking more water, you will then find that you are more dependent on the amount of water. I'll give you a classic example. If I drink 2 litres of water before 12 o'clock every day, I will find that I'm dependent, my body becomes dependent on having that water. So therefore, if I find on a day I don't drink those 2 litres, I will start to feel it. But that also highlights a bit of the conundrum behind dependence. We can't separate dependence from tolerance from withdrawal. Now, of course, the specification has asked us to do this. So that's why I do have several subheadings. So this is the subheading of physical dependence. Okay, so it says physical dependence is this idea that we have unpleasant physical symptoms if you abstain from the drug. Okay, and I suppose smokers feel this the most. If they're a regular smoker and they stop smoking, they'll soon feel it physically that they need the cigarette. Now, the reason that they are dependent is because in order to feel normal, okay, they will have to take the drug. Okay, so it says here the person depends on the drug to avoid these withdrawal symptoms and to function normally. Okay, so dependence is about our physical dependence is about our body physically being dependent, as you are dependent on your parents or your carers or whoever you live with, in order to kind of have everyday kind of living. Okay, now it says here it is accompanied by increased tolerance. So you can see very clearly there's no separation in the literature between dependence and tolerance. And so what we find here, of course, tolerance is this idea that we tolerate. Now what we're becoming tolerant towards is the drug or the addictive behavior. Okay, now this is another thing I think you're quite familiar with. Okay, so when you first had an alcoholic beverage, you may have had one Bacardi Breezer and felt a little tipsy. Okay, your body then adjusted to drinking the occasional Bacardi Breezer, and now you can drink 2 Bacardi Breezers before you feel tipsy. Now, of course, I know none of you are 18, so therefore none of you are actually drinking. So physical dependence is quite straightforward. It's about how our body gets used to and dependent on the addictive behavior. So in the same way, we also have psychological dependence. Now, what is really important here for us is that the specification separates physical and psychological dependence. So if I'm talking about psychological dependence, I need to focus on thoughts, emotions, and activities. Okay? We can't focus on the physical side of things because then that's not really answering the question. So in the same way that we have physical dependence, we have psychological dependence. So in other words, I may well be aware of the things that the drugs are doing to me, but I am psychologically dependent on them. Okay, so it says here, a characteristic of both types of dependence is cravings. Okay, now what we have with a craving, so even if it's psychological, I could be thinking about something, I kind of can't feel normal, be agitated, and I want to repeat the particular behavior. Now what I do find is that the cravings are this intense desire. Okay, so this that I can't remember, I need to feel normal, so I can't be normal without this. We then also need to recognize that, as I said, all 3 are quite linked. That is dependence, tolerance, and withdrawal. So any attempt to abstain or cut down, you will have intense cravings. Okay, you will experience intense cravings. So this basically says that if I'm trying to stop the drug or cut down, I'm going to experience cravings. Now, you might also be familiar with this because maybe during Lent you've given up chocolate or cake or one of the things that you really like and you feel that you would really enjoy. The moment you stop it, you start thinking about it, you start wanting it, you start craving it. Okay? Now, what I need to kind of say to you is that just experiencing these feelings does not make you an addict. I'm hoping that you've seen in my definition of addiction that this is not the case. Okay? But the problem is having these dependencies and ultimate cravings does make it extremely difficult to end addiction, because we have this sense of being unable to cope. So the difference between potentially an addict and a non-addict or just a user is this ability to cope or to take control. So yes, I may, the day of giving up chocolate or the weeks following the giving up of something I enjoy, really have a sense of craving and a dependence on the particular substance. But I'm able to distract myself, I'm able to do things differently in order to take that intensity away, okay, and not be taken over so I don't lose control. Now, I haven't given you much content here. There's nothing to this because when you look at the specification, it doesn't really imply that we need to have extended writing. It's a factual understanding of what is dependence, tolerance, and withdrawal. But I have turned to some expertise on why do we have this idea of dependence. Now, this is not examinable, but it might appeal to some of you who find this type of content quite stimulating. Now, the key to this is that there's lots of information here, and I'm going to focus on some of the things, okay? So, a very brief explanation from Epstein. He says that we usually have at least two systems working in us, okay? And that some people could have those two systems kind of working against each other. So it says that we experience differences between what we think and what we feel, okay? Think and what we feel. Now, these information processing systems that he talks about, okay, one is rational, that's your thinking part, and one is your experiences, your feeling, okay? Now, in the rational system, it's usually emotional free. Okay, so I might want some cake, I might really feel that I would be best served to have cake, but I could say, well, you know what, I probably shouldn't. I'm not doing any exercise or something along those lines, and therefore I can't afford to have the calories in my system. Okay, now this could relate to alcohol, to cannabis, to any of the kind of recreational drugs. I might kind of be rational and choose kind of not to. However, it says here the experiential system, on the other hand, drives us to behave in an emotional way. Okay, so on one day I might say to myself, no, I don't want cake, and I'm okay. But on another day I might completely turn around, and it could be, I'm having a bad day, I've heard some bad news, or I'm not feeling great today, I didn't sleep well, whatever it could be. So our feelings take over our thoughts. Okay, so what it says here, and this is particularly true to addicts, that acting irrationally, okay, is something which is linked to psychological dependence. In other words, I'm able to let my experiential system take over the rational system. In other words, my dependence is overcome. Now, this is a very short video because I wanted to split this up into 2 parts. In the next part I'll do tolerance and withdrawal, and there'll be a short question placed after that. Remember, please do keep in contact with us if you have any concerns or any kind of problems with doing the work, or if you're just really struggling. It's best for you to communicate with us rather than to not. Okay, thank you.